So it's always great to start the day with a tune, and Dana Lyons, the troubadour of Whidbey Island, will offer you his golden tones in a tune with real heart. So, Dana, take it away.
Thank you, Howie and Susan. Good morning, everyone. This song is called The Great Salish Sea, and it's told from the perspective of Granny, the now 104-year-old matriarch of our resident orcas. And it tells the story of, over the last century of her life, the changing sound of boats in the water. And I was inspired to write this song. I went to a talk by Val Veers about the effect of the noise of the giant ships on the orcas. And orcas can talk to each other through their songs, at least 5 to 7 kilometers when the water is quiet. When those giant ships are even a mile away, they can be a long ways away, they're so loud, it makes it's so the orcas can only hear each other maybe 100 yards. So imagine that, it goes from 7 kilometers to 100 yards. So it's a very serious thing. And I'm currently on a tour, it's a long tour, for the orcas and really for us all, raising awareness about the export of fossil fuels through the Salish Sea. If the coal export, the oil export, and the natural gas export proposals go through, there will be 2,200 additional large ships in the Salish Sea a year. You can do the math of how many additional per day. There's already so many, and it's very serious. What would one oil spill do to the orca? What would one oil spill do to our economy? Not to mention the rest of the beautiful creation. I have free tour posters out of and there's t-shirts and CDs. And also this song came out in a music video this year, which you can see on YouTube, The Great Salish Sea, or on my website, cowswithguns.com. We will swim 1,000 miles to reach the shores of Emerald Isles, with salmon spawning by the million, herring spawning by the billion. Gather with our pods again, the summer food, the summer friends, to raise our babies safe and free. We gather in the Salish Sea. Oh, hush, hear the swish of the boats on the water, the hollowed out cedars, the sons and the daughters, the rhythm of paddles caressing the water, the rhythm of paddles to come greet the orca. Remember the legend, the myth, and the story a long time ago, when we witnessed the glory with thousands and thousands of whales swimming free. The orcas come home to the Great Salish Sea. Oh. I hear your song for many miles, your distant thoughts, your distant smiles. Today we fish in different bays. Tonight we meet again to play. Oh, hush, hear the swish of the boats on the water, the great sailing ships with the sons and the daughters, the wind and the wood as it cuts through the water, the wind and the wood sailing out to the Orca. Remember the legend, the myth and the story, a long time ago when we witnessed the glory, with thousands and thousands of whales swimming free. The orcas come home to the Great Salish Sea. Oh, 100 times around the sun I saw the slaughter, smelled the blood, the water turning blue to brown, the metal ships, the screaming sound. I cannot hear your song today. The salmon gone, the herring late, and more the ships do come. Will anybody hear my song? Oh, hush, hear the scream of the ships on the water, the great super tankers, the coal ports, the freighters, the deafening noise overtaking the water, the deafening noise overcoming the Orca. Remember the legend, the myth and the story, a long time ago when we witnessed the glory, with thousands and thousands of whales swimming free. The orcas come home to the Great Salish Sea. Oh, hush, hear the voice from both sides of the border, the rallies, the blockades, the brave sons and daughters, the people speak out for protecting the water. The people are rising to come save the Orca. Oh, 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 oh. Thank you.
All right, we're live. I will now shift into presentator mode. I'm now presenting. And what I want to give you is an update on the whole progress of the Lolita campaign, going on for over 20 years, but also some context, some of the meanings, some of the history, some of the current very dramatic developments, and some of the prospects. Well, that's her. That was just taken last July in Miami at the Miami Seaquarium. She's known around the world as Lolita. And that's what we've called her all this time, because we want to tell people around the world about her, so we want to keep it to the name that they know. But that's not what they call her there. In 1970, when she was captured, about a mile away, right over here in Penn Cove, a veterinarian, Dr. Jesse White, was sent out to select one of the ones captured. They were in pens off the Seattle waterfront. And he found her, and somehow he had a feeling about her. He said she was so courageous and yet so gentle. And he, somewhere probably in Pike Place Market, found the name Toki, so he gave her that name. And from then on, everybody there, to this day now, and we're talking 45 years, many generations of trainers and veterinarians and staff have called her Toki, or Toki for short. So in the hope and anticipation that she may be coming home sometime to the Northwest, which that name speaks of the Northwest. It's a coastal Salish word, a greeting actually, for different tribes that met on the trail or were trading. And it would be a way of saying nice day, pretty colors, Toki. So we want to give her that name back and call her Toki. So for the most part, I'll be calling her Toki today. She's a wonder. She's amazing. She's a mystery. How does she survive 45 years in a little tank, in a little concrete box? It's 80 feet across. It's 20 feet deep now. At first, it was only 18 feet. And she is the only survivor of 40 some odd that were captured before 1973 in terms of the residents. And all the others had died by 1987, and yet somehow she survived. So it's really a mystery. It sort of begs an explanation. How does she stay alive? And not just alive, she's actually in very good health as far as every indication that we can find. There are some issues. I mean, she's eating dead fish. That's not all that nutritious. So she gets supplements, she gets some medications, she gets some antibiotics, and we don't know for sure what all else, but she's basically healthy. She has all her teeth. She doesn't have any outstanding, big infections that require constant medication for the rest of her life or anything. So how does she do it? It's really a kind of a mystery how healthy she is. And I just have to believe, I've been trying to figure this out for a long time, it has to do with where she came from and how she was raised. And I do mean raised. She was brought up, she was taught how to be an orca by her mother, basically, and her whole family. And I do believe that she still, to this day, has a vivid mental image of her family, in particular her mother. Her believed to be mother, we can't prove it because there isn't any DNA to match, but the ages and timing are right that L25 Ocean Sun here is her mother, and she's still alive in her late 80s. She's out there. And orcas, especially southern resident orcas, are bonded for life. They always have contact. They're always communicating. They're always in touch. They live for each other. They're there for each other all the time. And I just have to believe that Toki knows her mother is out there, or believes her mother is out there, and is staying alive in the hope and expectation that someday she's going to get back to her mother. They're not all so gentle. This photo, if you look at it for a few seconds, you'll see what's going on there, and if you saw blackfish, you'll know what's going on. This was sent to us by someone who got it from someone else, and we've tried to track down who the photographer was or who the people are in that photo, and we don't know. If anybody does know, please get in touch with us, but I know who that whale is. That's Hugo. That's the male that was there, caught in 1968 in Puget Sound, probably a close relative of Toki's, and he didn't cope all that well. He didn't like captivity at all, and it shows up right here. Rick O'Berry was a trainer of Hugo in the very early years in 68, 69, and he said Hugo once clamped down on his ankle and wouldn't let go for a very long time. It was very painful. And he also bashed his head against the wall until in 1980 he died of a brain aneurysm. So he didn't cope. And you know, orcas are strong. Their whole evolutionary history, their natural history, has made them incredibly robust and resilient and capable of handling any kind of situation, and yet they all succumb, except Toki. And there's Corky at the San Diego SeaWorld, captured actually about a year before Toki was, and she's still alive somehow in San Diego. So the few outliers that are still alive after so long in captivity, you just have to wonder, how do they do it? But as long as she is alive, we're going to try to get her back. And this was taken about a year ago by Jill Hine at the Seaquarium. It shows she's still got vim and vigor. She can still make these full breaches. It's just incredible. She's really come to be a kind of a teacher to me of perseverance, of grace under pressure, of patience, of tolerance. How does she put up with it? She's dominated all the time. She's manipulated by food, by feeding. Of course, she'll get enough to eat eventually, but they withhold food until the show so that she'll do the show, and she's fed during the show. And so she's constantly basically being dominated by the whole system, by the trainers, by the whole industry, the corporate culture of marine parks. And also the dolphins. There are currently 2 white-sided dolphins, Pacific white-sided dolphins in there with her. And of course, in the narration during the shows, they say, well, they're all one big happy family, but not so. They're antagonistic all the time. They chase each other. They rake each other. They're not friendly with each other. There is a question up on the top there. No. Okay, yeah, let's save questions for the end. So she's amazing. She's just incredible. And she's been an inspiration to me for a long, long time. And just to get people up to date, anybody who wasn't aware of the history, she was captured August 8th, 1970 in a mass roundup that herded the entire family that numbered over 100 probably at that time. That was long before the field studies, so nobody really knows. But they were herded into Penn Cove, and 7 of the young were selected and hauled out, put onto flatbed trucks, and taken down to Seattle and shipped all around the world. It was during the craze of displays of orcas, killer whales, in Germany and South America and all over the world. So she was one of them. And this is where she's been ever since. And I just don't understand how she does it. It's only 80 feet by 35 feet to the back to the show stand, and then there's a medical pool behind that. But it's not a clear line of travel. And the thing that gives us a lot of confidence that she does know where she came from and she still can relate to them is that she makes calls, still to this day. This is how she spends probably 23 hours of every day, just pretty much stationary up against the wall. And this, if everything works out, is what she sounds like. And I do have it on good authority, she's still making these calls. This is a over 20-year-old recording, but she is still making these calls on a daily basis. Monica Wieland, who's made it her life study to analyze these calls and itemize them, tells me that these are Southern resident calls, mostly LPOD calls, S22 calls, mainly, and S50, and strangely, S1 calls that were thought to be just JPOD calls. So maybe she's calling Granny, I don't know. But she does make these calls. That shows memory. That shows she can still communicate with her family to this day, even 45 years later. So we started a campaign in '95, and it was just on basically no budget, just with a story, with her story. We didn't really know about her or think about her before that. It was really the Free Willy and Keiko episodes and the research to figure out how to put him back in the ocean that got us thinking about it. I'm talking about Ken Balcom at the Center for Whale Research. Full disclosure, happens to be my brother, my half-brother. So I was keyed into all of that as it went down, and in the course of 1993, basically the entire year of studying the possibilities, the history, the literature, everything that could be found out about returning a captive whale or dolphin back into the ocean, we realized that, hey, we've got the perfect candidate sitting in Miami who is the last survivor of the Southern residents. So we turned our attention to that. Actually, Ken and the governor of Washington and the Secretary of State started the campaign March 9th, 1995. And a couple of days later, I started a nonprofit organization to try to conduct it. And we did a lot of demonstrations. I actually went to Miami for 2 years, from '97 to '99, did some street demos, tried to contact everybody I could, found out that most of the town is pretty well tied up with the Seaquarium as a big tourist attraction and doesn't really want to talk about the whale that's there, even if they agree with us. And we got a lot of media, National Enquirer, Miami Herald, really a lot of other media over the years, and some great documentaries and news shows and video clips. My favorite is the one on the upper right there. That's Kathy Gertson, the late fantastic Como TV news anchor, who hosted a one-hour special in 1996 called Lolita, Spirit in the Water. It's not on DVD, but it is on YouTube, so you can find it. It's really great. It really sets the stage and reveals a whole lot about Toki and about her capabilities in that documentary. But none of it really got any traction. None of it changed anything. It didn't affect the bottom line. They still got people going through the gate and paying money, and they stayed alive, and they weren't going to talk about returning any of the captives back to the ocean. So it kind of drove us nuts. We kept thinking, oh boy, we got really good media this time. This is going to turn the tide, and people are going to demand that she be allowed to go home. And a lot of people did. And I think what happened was there was kind of a latent understanding that was there, especially among the writers, the journalists, the influence people that could actually get the word out, but they really didn't have a way to do that without there being a news story to tell. And then this happened. March 24th, 2010, the trainer was tragically killed by Tillicum at Orlando SeaWorld, and Gabriella Copperthwaite, the director of Blackfish, tried to answer the question, why would a longtime captive kill his trainer, who they had presumably bonded with? And in the course of trying to answer that question, she dug deep into the whole history and the relationships and a lot of the unknown truths that came out during the hearing for the OSHA citations that happened, and some former trainers that spilled a whole lot of beans, and that really brought the consciousness up. And the times have changed dramatically. People now understand it across the board. I think it's majority opinion. It's just bad now to have orcas in captivity. It's just, it's awful for them. So that also launched a constant, steady drumbeat of demonstrations at the Seaquarium and elsewhere around the world. People were riled up in front of every SeaWorld now. So there's just a whole lot going on that shows the public has turned. They don't want to see orcas in captivity, and one of the metrics of that is the stock price of SeaWorld. It's gone way down. So there's a lot of dynamic flux in that whole industry right now, and heads have rolled, and they're trying all kinds of measures to try to pacify people, and they're still not getting it. They've got to let those whales in, really the dolphins as well, give them a better life, whether that's release or retirement in a sea pen. Somehow it's just wrong to make them into circus acts when that's not what they are. So it also energized a whole team of attorneys. Once you've got a team of attorneys on your side, you can start to make things happen. So in about late 2010, 2011, we were contacted by some lawyers who were strategizing, and they devised a sort of multi-pronged effort to get Lolita out of there, Toki, to bring her home. And one of the first actions out of the box was this one, and it actually wasn't about Toki. This was about 5 SeaWorld whales. They sued SeaWorld for a violation of the 13th Amendment against slavery. And of course that was dismissed, but it set the bar. It gave the public this foundation of the concept that it's just like slavery. Kidnapped from their family, forced into involuntary servitude to serve a master. How is that not slavery? And a lot of people understood that. I think that really did move the needle in terms of people's understanding of what captivity does to whales and dolphins. And they also noticed that there was a clear violation of the Animal Welfare Act, actually several of them. In terms of the pool size, that's the most blatant and obvious. It's supposed to be at least 48 feet in both directions. It's only 35 feet, unless you draw the tape measure over the station in the middle, but the whales can't go over, so it isn't an effective measurement. It's the way they fudge the details. So that was taken to court, along with that there is no shade from the midday sun, and the fact that she's alone. That's a violation. It very clearly says you got to have companions. And of course they say, well, there's dolphins in there, but they're not companions, they're adversaries. They add to her stress level. They don't help at all. So all good, clear violations, that was taken to court and dismissed and appealed, and then that was dismissed. But it was always dismissed on the grounds that the agency can do what they want, that they can issue a new license, which they do every year, and it's based on the original license. It doesn't have to review the facts or make them comply with the Animal Welfare Act regulations. So basically, it's regulations with no teeth. But the merits of the case, of the violations of those regulations, were never questioned. So, never judged. So it's pretty clear those are violations of the regulations. So that set in motion a whole set of strategies. These attorneys are amazing. They have turned out hundreds of pages of incredible documents, and they go into the natural history, into the history of captivity, into amazing detail. They're works of art, they're references themselves, the complaints, the appeals, all of the writs and the filings are just incredible. So the first one in 2012 was to sue the USDA for allowing the violations of the Animal Welfare Act, dismissed finally in 2015. Then there was the petition to the National Marine Fisheries Service to include Toki under the ESA because her family was listed in 2005 as an endangered population, subspecies or distinct population segment of a subspecies. They sort of had to make up the term because it was obvious that this population, the southern residents, were in very precarious shape. After a 20% decline between the mid-90s and 2001, finally in 2005, after several legal processes, they were listed, except that there was a paragraph included saying any captives are not included. So they challenged that first with a lawsuit. That was dismissed. Then a petition to address that and to bring it consistent. And she is a member, everybody knows that, of the southern residents. She should be included as a member of an endangered population. So finally, on another track was that OSHA was petitioned to issue the same citations to the Seaquarium that they had issued to SeaWorld, that SeaWorld appealed, that resulted in the hearing that exposed so much about SeaWorld. So Seaquarium at first appealed the citations, and then before the hearing backed off and said, okay, never mind. And since then, the citations then hold, and they are for endangering employees by putting them in the water with potentially dangerous animals. So there is now no more water work at the Seaquarium as of last summer. They don't get in the water with her. And then in May of 2015, she finally became actually included, officially listed as a member after several cycles, years of comment periods. Finally, she was included. So about a week and a half later, we sued. The lawyers were ready, of course, and they filed this suit against the Seaquarium itself for violating the ESA regulations against harm or harassment. Just like you can't go out and harm or harass the southern residents, you cannot harm or harass Toki because she's one of them. So that suit was filed last May, and now, finally, this year, this month, and next month, are some very exciting, dynamic developments, and this is the breaking news portion of the program, because we're in the stage of doing the discovery, exchanging documents. So our lawyers are getting just heaps of documents of all kinds from the Seaquarium. And of course, we're sending the emails where we mention her and stuff like that. Nothing incriminating, that's okay. And site inspections. And in fact, just January 20th, our side, our expert witnesses, including John Hargrove, who wrote the book about SeaWorld, Beneath the Surface, and he was there from 4 o'clock in the morning till 1:30 in the afternoon observing, and videotaping, and got a lot of very interesting information that is ready to go to court. And they will be coming out to the CPEN site, which is in the San Juan Islands. I'll show you some pictures of that. So there's this exchange of inspections. This is getting real. This is what we were looking for. This is how it happens. So there is a court date set for May. It could be pushed back, but before that, there will be mediation at the end of February, and I will be involved in that to help make the case that we should keep this out of court and let's negotiate. And if you'll let us bring Toki home, we'll give you good publicity. You'll be a full partner. You'll be a participant in doing this and get all the accolades for doing that. And right now the Seaquarium is for sale because it is a part of a conglomerate that's owned by a conglomerate that's owned by an investment house that has been trying to sell that whole conglomerate for now 6 years and has not been able to because of its value. It doesn't have the value that would give them the profit that investment houses like. So they haven't been able to sell it. So just about 2 weeks ago, they announced that they're going to just float it on the market, sell stock, and see if public investors, private investors will bring in the kind of money that they couldn't get from any buyer. And in the stories, very interestingly and not explained, it is mentioned one of the holdings, and that is out of 100 or so theme parks, water parks around the world. One of them is the Seaquarium. Why they mentioned the Seaquarium, I don't know, but there's a backstory there that I would like to hear, because I think the Seaquarium is a part of the problem. The value and the future of the Seaquarium now, because of her status being very questionable with all of these legal proceedings, has scared off the investors. They don't know if it's going to be a valuable property in the future. Apparently, that's my surmise, but it looks like that's the case. So they need to figure out how to turn the whole this whole problem into something profitable for them. So all of these efforts, all of these 20-plus years of campaigning, the 5-plus years of legal strategizing, everything has been oriented to the plan to return Toki home, to retire her in her home waters where she was born and raised, let her feel the natural world again, let her explore around, let her have some stimulation of nature, room to move, let her open up and explore, check things out. And that is the proposal. That's the resolution. That's the remedy for the whole problem of her being in captivity, is to return to this CPEN site right there. And I don't want to give the exact location just because we don't want to, attract crowds. It's a very quiet, peaceful scene right now. But it's perfect. It's just a nice little cove within a bay, protected by islands all around. It has no issues. The water quality is pristine. There's an oyster farm very close by, so they monitor and maintain good water quality all the time. There's just no outstanding issue that could be a problem. There's even a very gently sloping beach that can be contoured and covered with a nice thick mat to work as a slide out so that veterinarians can be able to get a look at her. And of course she knows how to do that. I don't know what the signal is, but she'll come right up to the slide out. She's been doing it for 45 years. But in the very beginning, it wouldn't be the entire area. It would be a smaller area just to ease the transition. She's not used to a big area. We want to make it a very gradual transition, and that's another reason that we need the participation of the Seaquarium now, because her people have got to come with her. She does get to know people. She learns to trust people, and they need to come with her and help explain, reassure her, accompany and stay with her for days, weeks, maybe longer after she returns. So we're doing everything that we possibly can to make it comfortable for her, and transport has never harmed an orca. So it can be done very safely. She was transported there, and those were probably inadequate methods at that time, or early methods than what they have now. So it's routine. It's in the business. She goes into a sling. The sling is brought up, and she is put into a big sort of a cradle or crate that is half filled with chilled water, ice water, because that's the main problem, is overheating, but that's dealt with by ice water. That is then driven to the airport. She's rolled up into a C-130 transport, flown over to Bellingham Airport, and then put onto another truck and 3 miles down to the Bellingham Harbor and driven onto a barge that has a crane and towed out to the sea pen site and lifted in her sling and gently lowered into her home for the first time in 45 plus years. So it certainly can be done. And that's what it looks like. That's her home. Compare that to a circus. For her, it's going to be, she'll remember, and she'll be so relieved, we're sure. And there is really only one case study, and that is Keiko. And of course, that's been, widely misunderstood as a failure because he died after 5 years in Iceland. But when he first got there, and for years after he was first immersed, but from the first minute that he was lowered into the water, he thrived. He loved it. He kicked after however many. I mean, we're talking from Newport, Oregon to Iceland. So it was, I think, a 12 or 13 mile trip with a stopover in Newfoundland on the way. So a long, long trip. And when he finally worked his way out of the sling, when they lowered him into his home waters, he kicked his heels and moved around and dove for a long time and didn't want to come back and talk to humans for a long time. He wanted to look around. I think she'll do the same thing. And not only that, but it's in the literature, in the Merck Veterinary Manual, that the best therapeutic place, the best environs for any captive marine mammal is to approximate their natural environment as closely as possible. Well, how about their natural environment? That ought to work. So, poke a hole in that. I don't see that there is any stage, any part of that plan that has any significant risk. Of course, you can't say absolute. There's nothing absolute in life, but where is there any significant risk based on any kind of evidence? Of course, people throw out their expectations and prejudices, but there is no significant risk involved. So now let's look at the species, Orcinus orca. I want to give you a sense of just how strong they are, mentally and physically, and from every indication that we can come up with. First is brain power, and it is truly incredible. Their brains are huge. They're like 4 times the size of human brains. And lest you assume that, well, okay, maybe they're big, but that's quantity. Their quality can't be that good. Well, it is. I can't begin to really interpret and decipher everything that's up there, and there's much, much more, of course, if you want to get into it in depth. But every indication of intelligence, associational cortex, of recall capacity, of memory is evident in the neuroanatomy, their brains. There's no reason to say that she doesn't remember her home and her family. Their families are most important to them, their mothers especially. How would she forget her mother and her family and her home? And just for a glance at the evolutionary history, I don't know if you can see the orca in there, or sinus orca, so I've highlighted it. The orcas are dolphins, but they were the first of the dolphins, and always the biggest by far of all the dolphins. And there isn't a whole lot of fossil record, but the teeth that are found that go back about 6 million years indicate they were in their current size, their basic size proportions, presumably also their brain size, at least 6 million years ago, probably longer, probably 8 or so million years ago. So they've been around a long, long time. Just for a little perspective on that, we humans have only been walking around for less than 4 million years, not had big brains for more than 1 million years, and not shown any capacity for cultural organization, participation, cooperation, communication, or culture in any form until, really, if you want to look at the evidence, it only goes back 40, 50,000 years. So that's a blink in terms of the time that orcas have been in the ocean. But not only that, they've been the top predator. They've been without adversary, without any predator to cause them any stress. Nobody touches an orca. Not only are they big and really, really powerful, but they're notorious for their teamwork, for their ability to cooperate. They've got each other's backs all the time. So you can't attack them. You can't sneak up on them. They've been, unlike virtually every other kind of wildlife out there, without the experience of stress and fear in all of those years. So they've had the luxury to devise and develop and build their lifestyles in the ways that are most pleasing. I don't know how to define that exactly, except in terms of comfort and satisfaction, that they have been able to live their lives in that way for all of that time. So now to kind of bring it back home, let's look at her family, the southern resident orcas. I won't get into a lot of detail. Most of us know quite a bit about them. 86 of them now, with the new baby from the 18th, seen in Puget Sound. And we're sad to note the loss of J31 Suchi's baby. Also seen that day, Suchi was pushing her around, holding her up for the several hours of the encounter, never did let her or him go, the baby. So that also illustrates, and that's about the third instance that is known of newborns that died being held up and carried around by their mothers. So that illustrates that bond, how tight that is, even after they've died. But with Toki in Miami, there are 86. So that is a southern resident community. But the question is, what's a community? What is an orca community? This is sort of at the forefront of science right now, at the vanguard of investigations to figure out, what are these animals? How do they live that way? Because they're not like any others. It is now known that they are without parallel, except in humans. In other words, every other kind of wildlife. And I'm a big fan of elephants and wolves and other highly social species out there. And they are very complex and very developed. But in terms of cultural complexity and diversity around the world, there is no parallel. I would even question if humans are at that level. And that's not just me coming up with that. This was actually established in 2001 in this paper by Rendell and Whitehead. And as they say, they have no parallel outside humans in terms of their cultures of sympatric populations which is what we have right here, unlike anywhere else in the world. I mean, we really need to, acknowledge that we see residents and transients completely different. They look pretty much alike, at first glance. They're the same species, but they're in completely different cultural communities that have nothing to do with each other. Genetically separated by the geneticists' estimation, 700,000 years. And yet they're next door, cross paths, fully aware of each other, sometimes within a mile of each other. They certainly hear each other all the time. And yet there has been no interbreeding for thousands of generations at minimum. The transients are more closely related to the mammal eaters in the North Atlantic than they are to the southern resident fish eaters here. So it's a wonder. It's really a marvel in science. I mean, the field work has been done. This has been established and documented and described, but not explained. It's been attempted to in a lot of the popular literature. This is a Smithsonian Institution article, Understanding Orca Cultures. And it's an attempt. It's a very good description by Seattle writer Lisa Stifler. But, it just sort of describes. It doesn't really go very far toward understanding. And even in the sub-headline there, which I don't think Lisa wrote, but it talks about the behaviors that differ from pod to pod. And yes, there are some minor differences between pods, but that's not the issue. The issue is between communities, between residents and transients. And we have this all over the world. In this great graphic by Uko Gorder, this is the state of the art. This is the best depiction, and Uko must have gone through thousands and thousands of photographs to be able to very accurately illustrate the different types of orcas that are found around the world. And those off on the left side, those are all around the Antarctic. And so they're all basically in the same habitat, a lot of overlap. And yet, look how different they are. Different eye patches, different sizes, different coloration, different capes, that coloration from the saddle patch forward. All of that is different populations, which are, in effect, really different cultures, different developed cultures that co-inhabit the habitat but maintain their fidelity, no dispersal, no recruitment, fully aware of the others, but they are bonded, they are loyal for life from birth with their family. Nobody strays. If they stray, like, say, Luna or Springer, they don't rejoin another family. Keiko found that out in Iceland. He was not able to rejoin any up there because, presumably, and this, of course, there wasn't any field work to establish this, but his family wasn't there. He didn't have anyone to adopt him that was from the culture he was taken from. So they will not join up with another culture. But the state of the art right now in the scientific community is to describe these as ecotypes. But ecotypes lump communities. For instance, the northern and southern residents are one ecotype. But that doesn't match what they find in the field because they have nothing to do with each other. They happen to have roughly the same diets, the same family systems, the same lifetime loyalty with their mothers, but they are different communities. So how does that happen? Well, as Bob Pittman, who was the editor of that Top Predator issue of the American Cetacean Society newsletter, as he explains, yeah, well, the ecotype term is really just a placeholder. It's sort of an approximation. It's the best we can do right now because we don't really understand these communities. What I'm trying to say to you is that science is not up to speed, is trying, but they have a phenomenon here that they don't have the concepts to understand, not within the biological sciences. So the debate right now, one of the debates, is should we divide them up into species? And that is a very big movement within the research community to do that based on those ecotypes. The different types have different, I got the monkey signal. Are different enough that, and that they're genetically different, have been for long enough, they should be considered different species. Okay, so that's been proposed, but the counter proposal is, well, not really, they're really just all one species complex or complex species that have a propensity for xenophobic populations. They avoid each other. Of at most a few hundred individuals. And that is actually an interesting little tidbit that goes to their ability to live in comfort over thousands of generations, is that they somehow live in relatively small populations. For a top predator, they could theoretically eat themselves out of house and home, put a strain on the carrying capacity of their habitats, but somehow they don't. They don't now. Maybe they did, 8 or 10 million years ago, but they've learned not to. So they don't overpopulate their habitats. The other big debate right now is to explain this cultural diversity. And I'll just kind of breeze through this because these are the attempts. And this first one from 2012 says, well, maybe it's because of dietary specializations. They specialize, learn the skills, form a community around a certain narrow diet within the spectrum of what they can eat, which is anything out there. And then once they've got those skills, then they're narrowed down, and as creatures of habit, they're never going to change, and so they stay in those communities. So that's one, very heartfelt attempt to explain cultural diversity in orcas. And then there's this one, more recent, and this is the abstract. I won't make you read that, but here is the essence of it. Maybe it's glacial cycles. Maybe because habitats were isolated from glacial activity, they became isolated and intact, separated from all the others, and then they just continued that after the glaciers retreated as creatures of habit. That's just sort of what they decided to do. So, my point is that science is trying to figure this out and hasn't. They've got different explanations, but we still don't really have a handle on the cultural, social structure and tendencies of orcas. So, to wrap up, I just want to say that in my belief, almost across the board, people will say Toki can't come home because it's too late. It's been too long. She's been in captivity too long. It would stress her, it would shock her. She wouldn't know what to do. She doesn't have the wherewithal, the memories to cope. And I would say that's because we, in the scientific community as well, underestimate her tremendously. I think she has capabilities that have just not been well described. Orcas in general do, and she especially, as a survivor of over 4.5 decades in a tiny concrete box, she has incredible capacities that we do not yet understand, but I think will assure that she'll do just fine when she comes home. With that, thank you very much.